Good morning. We are very glad to have you in our audience today. Everybody who's listening to me right now is listening by recording, and it'll be played on Sunday morning as people are going generally to the assembly. And I'm delighted to have all of you. I understand from the technology that there are a number of people listening in. And when you take the number of people that are listening in and recognize that they may have 2 to 7 or 8 or 9 people at that particular place, then it reminds me that there's a good audience, and I appreciate each one of you. We're studying in Book of Acts in the process of the part where Paul is under trial by a succession of Roman governors. He had been delivered to Felix, as we finished last week. He had spoken to the council. He'd recounted the case of his conversion and how he had at one time been opposing the Christians and fighting them and killing them and bringing them to prison. But then at the end he said that Jesus had sent him to the Gentiles. And at that point the Jews rose up in anger and were about to kill him. And he was rescued by a tribune. We see a number of centurions throughout this area and throughout the Bible, throughout the Gospels. A centurion would be roughly equivalent to a captain. Captain has 2 platoons. A centurion ruled basically of 100 people, where he got the name, and that was at least somewhat comparable to a captain. The tribune, on the other hand, was more like a colonel. He had several centurions and their forces under his control, and he has some centurions here that he is working around. He came to the rescue of Paul when Paul had let it be known that he was a Roman citizen, and the Jews were very close to beating him and killing him, and he rescued Paul. And then he heard, which we had recounted, from Paul's nephew, his sister's son, that there were about 40 men who had taken a vow that they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. And they were setting out to ambush him whenever he was around. And so for that reason, the tribune sent 2 centurions with their armies with him to Caesarea, to the Roman governor, who at that time was Felix. And when he appeared before Felix, he did as he nearly always does. He recited his conversion and why he was doing what he was doing. And the tribune sent a letter to Felix, the governor, beginning in Romans 23 at verse 26. This is the letter that he sent. Claudius Lysias, that's the name of the tribune, to His Excellency the Governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and were about to be killed by them when I came upon them with soldiers and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen. And desiring to know the charge for which he was accused of, I brought him down to their council, and I found that he was being accused about questions of their law, but charged with nothing deserving of death or imprisonment. And when it was disclosed to me that there would be a plot against this man, I sent him to you at once, ordering his accusers also to state before you what they have against him. So the soldiers followed the tribune's instructions, led him safely to Caesarea, where the Roman governors had their ruling place, and brought Paul to them. And the Jews really had nothing to accuse him of except violation of their traditions and laws, and the Romans had little concern about that. And since Paul was a Roman citizen, they were already disposed to take his side. And here's what Paul said to in front of Felix. This begins in verse 11. of chapter 24. Knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I clearly make my defense, so you cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship in Jerusalem, and they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, either in the temple or in the synagogues or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they are now bringing up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, and he'd already said that Felix had an accurate knowledge of the way, according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down by the law and written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So always taking pains to have a clear conscience toward both God and man. Now, after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation to present offerings. Remember that. That's an important thing that caught Felix's ears, and that caused him to do some of the things that he did later. He told them that he was bringing an offering to the nation, putting together the book of Acts and what's really revealed in the epistles, especially in Corinthians. We know that Paul was taking up a collection from the Jewish Christians. As he himself said, they owed the Jewish Christians the gospel that had been preached to them, so they owed to the Jewish Christians alms to help them in their famine that was going on. And he had collected a number of things, good bit of money from the churches of Macedonia and Achaia, and was bringing it to Jerusalem, and it was presented to the Jews and the elders for the use of those who were hungry. And he went on to say, while I was doing this, they found me sorry about this. My eyes don't work very well. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they sought to be here before you. They ought to be here before you to make accusation, should they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing that I have done. I stood before the council, other than the time that I cried out while standing among them, it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am before you this day. They accused him of taking a Gentile into the temple and therefore defiling the temple. Paul had not done that, and he had already denied that charge and just declared it to be false. So verse 23 says, Felix already had a fairly accurate knowledge of the way, and he put them he put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. And then he gave orders to the centurions that he be kept safely, but in a prison, or kept safely in a house and not allowed to get out, but he would have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. Then it mentions Felix's wife, Drusilla. Let me do a little bit of history here. We're going to be reading in a little bit about Agrippa II. The first Herod Agrippa is the one who killed John the Baptist. This Herod Agrippa II is that of Herod's son. He is married to Drusilla, and Felix is married to Bernice. And the Bible dictionaries will tell you that Agrippa and Bernice and Drusilla are brother and sisters. that Agrippa was living with one of his sisters in incest, and then Felix was his brother-in-law and was living with another of his sisters. So after some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, and incidentally a brother to Herod Agrippa II, and sent for Paul and heard him speak about his faith in Jesus. And we'd already mentioned that he had reasoned with Felix about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. And Felix was alarmed. I believe the King James says he trembled, and then said, "Go in peace, and when I have a more convenient season, I will summon you." At the same time, this gives a little bit of Felix's motive. At the same time, he would hope that Paul would pay him money to set him free, because he had heard that he had brought alms to the people and realized there was a source of money there somewhere. And so after the time that Felix just left Paul in prison, promising to come to him when he had a more convenient season, which of course never came. And he was succeeded in that period of time by Festus, and Festus desiring to do the Jews a favor, rather, he left him for Festus because Felix was desiring the Jews a favor, and he left Paul in prison. Then, chapter 25, 3 days later, Festus had arrived in the province and went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. And the chief priest and the principal men of the Jews laid out the case against Paul, and they urged him, asking him a favor against Paul, that he summon him to Jerusalem, and that was because they were planning to ambush him and kill him if he got to their territory. Felix replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea, and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So he said, "Let the men of authority among you go down with me, and if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring the charges against him." So they came down, and Paul argued the case, the defense that neither against the Jews nor against neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against any Caesar have I committed any offense. Festus wanted to do the Jews a favor also, and he said to Paul, "Do you want to go to Jerusalem and there be tried on the charges that are before me?" And Paul, of course, knew that if he went to Jerusalem, they were waiting to ambush him and kill him. And therefore, as a Roman citizen, he chose to a privilege that is given to them. "I'm standing here before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done nothing wrong, as you yourselves know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have not committed anything of which I should deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death, but if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar." And those were sort of magic words for a Roman citizen. That stopped every charge against him where he was, and gave him the right to go to Caesar. So Festus then said, conferred with his council, answered, "To Caesar you have appealed, and to Caesar you shall go." But while that was going on, Agrippa and Bernice came. Bernice, as I mentioned, was a sister to Felix's wife, and also to Agrippa, with whom she lived as husband and wife. And when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus, and stayed there many days, and during the course of time referred to Paul and the fact that he knew he was being held there. And Agrippa said, "I would like to hear from him and what he has to say." But Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, since I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, said he, you will hear him. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice sat with a great pomp and ceremony as they entered the audience hall, and the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city were also there. So at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with you, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here. Should this be ought that to live, that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving of death, and as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him there. That's an interesting claim by Pelican. He had no choice under the law but to send him there, but he said he had decided to do that. But I have nothing definite to write to my decision about him, and therefore I brought him before you, King Agrippa, to see if I can have something to charge him with when I send him to Agrippa. And then Agrippa said to Paul, you have permission to speak for yourself. And Paul then stretched out his hand and made his defense. And here basically is what he said to Agrippa. I consider myself fortunate that it is before you, King Agrippa, that I'm going to make my defense today against the accusations of the Jews, especially because you are familiar with all the customs and controversies of the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to listen to me patiently. My name is my manner of life from my youth, spent from the beginning among my own nations and up to Jerusalem, is known by all the Jews. They have known for a long time that I am part of the strictest party of our people, a Pharisee, and that I was taught by one of the most famous of the rabbis, Gamaliel. And I was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposition to the name of Jesus of Nazareth, and I did so. And he has a record of leading the persecution against Christians, of killing some, of agreeing to the stoning of Stephen, which we'd already noted, and to make it known that he was opposed to Christians, and he was on the way to Damascus with a letter to seize Christians in the synagogue there and bring them back to Caesarea, back to Jerusalem for punishment by the council, and perhaps even for death there. And for I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped your notice, for they've been done not been done in a corner, King Agrippa. Do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. That's an expression. That's an interesting expression. These things were not done in a corner. Paul makes that point over and over. Peter makes that point. When he preached in Pentecost, he talked about Jesus, who had worked powers and wonders, and said to the people he was preaching to, as you also know. One of the proofs of the resurrection and the truth of Jesus in the Gospels is the fact that he was heard by so many people, and none of them could deny what was said. Some of them wanted to deny his miracles, but they were present and saw them and couldn't. Some of them wanted to ascribe his miracles to Beelzebub, the prince of demons, instead of God and the Holy Spirit, and they were rebuked very strongly. And over and over again, it became obvious that the miracles proved that he was from God, and the leaders of the Jews were refusing to accept that. And Nicodemus was one who did accept that. you'll remember that he said about Jesus, I know that you're a teacher come from God. For nobody can do the things that you do unless God be with him. He recognized that truth. Many of the other Pharisees simply closed their mind, closed their eyes, and refused to believe what was clearly before them. And then they accused Paul of taking a Gentile into the temple. And Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. But of course, Paul also knew that he would be killed if he had not appealed to Caesar, because if he went back to Jerusalem, those men would ambush him and put him to death. So then Paul then set sail to Rome, and verse 27 says, and when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort of the Augustan cohort, named Julius, and embarking on a ship of alchemy, which was about to sail to the coast of Asia, we put to sea, and accompanied by Aristarchus of Macedonia from Thessalonica, one of the men that had been a messenger of the churches to deliver the alms to the people in Jerusalem. Aristarchus is still with him. It's obvious that Luke is still with him, because he's saying that we set sail. And Luke is the one who wrote the book, and the we's of that book are his, and when he changes to they, that indicates that he's not with them. But here, he is with them. He's on the ship that is on the way to Rome, and is ready to be with Paul and to suffer whatever he suffers. Putting out to sea from there, that's from Caesarea, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. And when we sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia, and there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing to Italy, and he put us on board. Take up the story there. It becomes obvious that the centurion has a great deal of faith in Paul, partly because Paul prophesied some things that were to come, and the centurion believed him. And then Paul said, we're going into a storm, and when we encounter that storm, we will be in great danger, and the ship will be lost and the things that are in it. But there appeared, and this is the word he said, there appeared before me an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve. Now, that's interesting terminology. Paul said, I belong to God. He is the one I serve, and he is the one who is my master, whose I am and whom I serve. There appeared to me an angel of the God whose I am and whom I serve, and he said, if we stay in the ship, if all the individuals stay in the ship, that we will all be saved. And the centurion believed that. And even though the soldiers were saying that they should get in a ship and leave, Paul said, if they leave, we'll all perish. And so the centurion cut the ropes of the boat and set it free where they was no longer available to the men on the ship, and they sailed on. And it came to pass exactly as Paul had said, that the ship was grounded, it was broken open, they lost all the cargo, but all the people who stayed on the ship were saved. And they eventually made their way from where they had been run into land to the island of Malta. And there they saw a group of people who knew some of what had happened, and knew, of course, that they had been shipwrecked, and had come to them. And they had built them a fire to keep them warm. They were wet, probably, undoubtedly, from leaving the ship and swimming to shore. And while they were building the fire, a poisonous viper came out and bit Paul. And they came to this conclusion. They said, no doubt this is a man who, though he's escaped the terrors of the sea, was nevertheless doomed to die and has now been bitten by this serpent. But Paul shook the serpent off and into the fire, and it did him no harm. He had no bad side effects from it at all. And so they then concluded that this man must be a god. And Paul said, of course, that's not true either. But I'm a servant of God, and I am come to here on my way to Rome, where the Lord has sent me to testify to him and to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, who will be put to death in Rome, but who will be raised from the dead to prove that he is the Son of God and the Christ of God. We'll take up there next time and begin at that point as Paul gets to Rome. He's put into a house, not a dungeon, allowed to live in his own private house. Soldiers were bound to him, chained to him day and night, so he couldn't get away. But he was allowed to have his friends bring whatever they wanted him to have and to come to see him. And as we shall see, it was kind of interesting that Paul was the prisoner, but the soldiers tied to him basically were prisoners also and had no choice but to hear Paul testify to the truth about Jesus and to the gospel. At least some of them were converted. Thank you for being with us, and we'll begin at that point next week as we take up this narrative in the latter part of the book of Acts. God bless you in Jesus' name.